Yo, what up? How's it going? And welcome back to another video. Today is going to be the second episode of the BTJ podcast, Blame the Jungler, because everybody loves blaming their jungler, right? I say this is the second episode because we did one episode like a year ago. We're just now bringing it back. Cool. So just gonna start this out talking about the topics we're gonna talk about, and kind of how we're going to be doing the next, 30 minutes to an hour or so. Cool. So today's topics we have are TL versus CG, which actually happened, of this time of the recording, happened a couple hours ago. And then we also have C9 versus COG, which happened yesterday of the time of the recording. And we're going to do some gauntlet talk. We're not going to talk about finals or the third place match. We're going to save that for an episode that's going to be in a couple of days, previewing the matchup, because some things can change between now and then. So we'll preview the matchup in a couple of days, but this episode mainly is going to be recap talk. And I do want to talk a little bit about Gauntlet, even though Gauntlet is really far away. I do want to have a little bit of discussion about that, because I think Gauntlet play is going to be the most interesting play. Apart from the finals, obviously the finals are going to be very hype, but I think the Gauntlet play is really interesting to me. I just changed some of my encoder settings. If anybody watched my VOD review that I did of the C9 COG series, not the best quality in terms of video output, but I honestly just needed to update my OBS and change a couple things on there. So hopefully this is going to be all good. It looks all good on my recording screen right now, but hopefully it's all good whenever we get to the output section. Looks weird. What's going on there? Anyways, cool. All right, so let's we're gonna first talk about the TLCG series because that's the most fresh on my mind. Alrighty, so let's get the tail of the tape. All right, so I have open on my screen right here the Games of Legend website. Shout out to them. Just kind of comparing the teams before we actually talk about how the series actually played out. So contrary to some belief, Team Liquid is somewhat of an early game team. You can see that based off their stats. See the gold differential at 15 is 1400. CS differential at 15 only plus 10. Tower differential at 15.3. So has some first tower percentage. This first tower percentage is pretty good, but it's not as high as, for example, CGs that we're going to see in a second. First blood percentage is pretty average. They're not like a hyper-focused early game team, but when you have the best players on each position, not the, maybe not the number one best player, but a top 3 player at each position, naturally you're going to get some gold advantages. So they don't play super around early game. They do have, I believe, have the fastest game time, but that just comes with being the best team, as well as that quick game time and stuff like that. Key thing is some people believe Team Liquid's a super hyper-focused early game team. That's not a whole lot of people who believe that, but the stats do maybe support that. And then a lot of people think they're more of like a scale-up type of team. But these stats obviously don't support that, and I don't support that claim either. Their Team Liquid's kind of a difficult team to figure out because they have so many different looks, I think. I think they're a little bit, if you didn't know anything about it and didn't watch any of their games, you'd be like, oh yeah, they're a bot-focused team. And a lot of times that is true. But also, they can be a solo lane-focused team. They play a lot of Sonoteric, which they did in this series. They played a lot of Akali, which they haven't really shown a whole lot this season until this series, and can play around their solo lanes as well, but historically have been playing more around their bot lane. But they have a bunch of different looks. They're a hard team for me to figure out, honestly. And that's usually a good calling card to have a very good team, is when you have a bunch of different looks. Cool. So they have a pretty solid early game, but this is going to come if you win a lot of your matches. You should have a solid early game. Except for Cloud9, historically always a deficit team. Pretty interesting. All right, let's look at Clutch Gaming over here. So Clutch Gaming, this is including their playoff series. Their stats are including their playoff series against TSM, whereas I don't believe Team Liquid's included playoff history. That's why they have 13 wins, 9 losses. This is including their playoffs this season. Cool. So you'll get CGs. So a lot of people think they're a hyper-focused early game team. So they're just kind of a crazy team. They're very solo lane focused in the early game. That is for certain. COG has a pretty unique style and a pretty defined style. They're pretty easy to figure out in terms of how they like to play. So Cody Sun is one of the best late game hyper carried players, really of all time in North America. He's more of a sit back and lane and farm. Is definitely what Cody Sun is a type of player for being. You can look all the way back to Immortals, all the way back that time. There's even a time where TSM played Immortals. This is when I first like really, I've always been in the league since like season 2 and stuff like that, but like really paying attention to the games. It's on this level at least. I was watching when they played against them, when TSM played against Immortals, and I just remember, or maybe it wasn't Immortals, maybe it was Team Liquid versus 100 Thieves. It was Team Liquid versus 100 Thieves when Cody Sun was on 100 Thieves actually. And just for example, he says, I seen he locked in, Cody Sun locked in Caitlyn, and he took Doran's shield to lane, which there's sometimes when that's acceptable, but he's like, he locks in Caitlyn and takes Doran's shield to lane, and I knew we won. Because Cody Sun is not a lane focused player. He just wanted to survive the lane, and you're playing Caitlyn, so it's kind of a weird thing to do. So, anyways, that's just something to think about. But I think Cody Sun's a very great player. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So we have Cody Sun and Vulcan. Definitely just going to be a scale up side of the map. And then their jungler, Lyra, he likes to play scaling junglers as well most of the time. They don't like hyper focus around ganking. He plays a lot of level 6 junglers like Skarner. Skarner's a huge pick for CG. And they play around their solo lanes with the jungle pressure that they can get. But Lyra is definitely like a farm up style jungler and then gets going. He reminds me of Ambition a little bit in that regard. At least that's what I see. I could be incorrect on that. But anyways, so and then they're pretty solo lane focused in the early game, so they pick powerful solo laners that can so they can have some type of pressure point on the map usually. And then they rely on their hyper carry in the late game, and then playmaking out of their solo laners with the actual carry on Cody Sun's shoulders in the late game is usually what they do. And then also, the solo laners like to play those hyphy picks like the Kiana, the Irelias, Aatroxes, stuff like that. Power picks is what they like to play, is what Demonte likes to play. You can see over here, the most played this season, which is pretty strange. Kiana and the Silas, the Irelia. So you can see that right there. Cool deal. I love the 1Z pick. But look at these scaling marksmen right here. That's what Cody Suns like to do. So everything I said, supported by the stats. All right, so that's the tail of the tape right there. So Clutch has a very defined style, like we just talked about. They want to scale up with their marksmen, play around their solo lanes early, and then they're definitely a team fighting team. Team Liquid is a little bit of a hard team to figure out. They're kind of good at every phase of the game, or above average, especially when you're playing against teams in NA. They're just better at every stage of the game usually. So that's why they're a little bit harder to figure out with me, because they can play that scale up type of game. I think they usually like to be the aggressors in games though. If you're the better team, I really buy into the philosophy. If you're the better team, you should just be punishing the enemy team. You can be winning at all phases of the game. There's another philosophy. If you're just a better team than the enemy, then you'll be happy to scale with them because you're going to execute better. That's another philosophy. But I'm a big fan of punishing in the early game to put yourself in the driver's seat around a clear strong side of the map that you have drafted. If you're the better team, then you should be able to play around your strong side of the map better than the enemy team and play around your weak side better as well. And you get the lead, you're in the driver's seat, and then you just close out the game because you're the better team. And bad teams, I'm a big fan of philosophies. If you're the worst team, you play around minimizing. If you don't have a good chance of winning the series, there's 2 ways of playing this. You either go crazy on them, or you really focus on executing your team fights correctly and getting in a position to where you can go into a team fight at an even state, or maybe a slight deficit if you know you're going to be at a deficit, picking champions that work better in that situation. So that's neither here nor there, but that's just kind of a game philosophy that I like to think about a little bit. Cool. So let's put this in dark mode. We're on this screen. Let's look at the actual series and how it played out. I thought this series was pretty exciting. Game 1 was obviously the game 1 is pretty much a stomp, 26-10, and kills 10 towers to 0. So this game is a stomp. There's not a whole lot to talk about other than Jensen had a really pop-off game. What was cool is they actually played around their solo laners, and Impact played on the Renekton as well. So this look I'm not a big fan of for Clutch. They have the scaling bottom lane. I mean, it's not super bad look. They have the scaling bottom lane and aggressors in the laning phase, or at least winning lanes on the solo lanes, and a scaling jungler. Not a terrible look, but they just honestly just got punished in that game. Pretty much a similar story in the second game, but Clutch wins this because they actually went out in these side lanes and or went out in the solo lanes. I do like this look. Obviously there's some confirmation bias. It's kind of conflicting for what I just said, but this look, scaling bottom lane, Xayah is one of the best. You always want Cody Stone on a scaling carry, and then playing around scaling bottom lane, scaling jungler. They actually have a scaling top laner right here, and then they have really powerful side laners. So Clutch like to draft with 1-3-1 options and then flank potential from the mid laner. I really like that. And then Team Liquid had a 1-3-1 option, team fighting scaling, but it just didn't end up working out in that game. We're going to quickly go through each game right here, and then main topics I want to talk about how the series actually ended up playing out. We'll talk about that afterwards. I'm going to just go through these games quickly like this, and then we'll talk more about how the series actually played out. So now we have a different look from Team Liquid. They have a scaling jungler. They still have the two powerful solo laners, and then a dominating bottom lane. And then on this side of Clutch, we have the scaling bottom lane. You can want the scaling bottom lane for them every game. Kind of an even mid lane matchup, and then a scaling top laner. So essentially what you have is you have two hard winning lanes with the Renekton and Caitlyn. You have two hard winning lanes and a scaling jungler, and the scaling jungler can play super well around. So when you draft a Sejuani, you want to be able to play around solo. You want to be able to play around your solo lanes, and what you want in those solo lanes is melee champions, so you can get that permafrost passive. So great synergies with these other lanes. Has the ability to protect the bottom lane, so they can just get plate gold and move around the map. So that was so yeah, they have three winning lanes and a scaling jungler, but that scaling jungler actually combos super well with their winning lanes. So it in terms makes Sejuani an early game jungler, because of the synergies with the two melee champions. So really great draft from Team Liquid. I think this draft from Clutch is really hard to execute. This is just a team fighting comp, but not a lot of options in the early game, and I don't think you can just take that against Team Liquid. You can't just take 3 losing lanes and expect to out team fight them. Cool. What we got in this game? Clutch won this game. Yeah, so they have the scaling jungler again. Two melee champions that can synergize. I mean, Jace is halfway melee, but he has a lot of auto resets. Not auto resets, but even when he's in his gun form, has an ability to help stack up with the Sejuani. He has the one reset on his knockback, so pretty good synergy with Sejuani. So you have a winning lane right here. Any lane that Jace is in is a winning lane. You actually have the Silas matchup this time with the Irelia. We'll talk more about that lane matchup in just a second, because I do like talking about that lane matchup. It's kind of an interesting lane matchup. And then you have Varus and Tahm Kench. I'm not a huge fan of Varus Tahm Kench priority, and they drafted this in the first rotation, I believe. They drafted this at 2-3. Yeah, they drafted this at 2-3 on red side. I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of priority on Varus Tahm Kench. I completely understand why it's picked. I completely understand the theory, and I completely understand there might be a lot of statistics that back up why this lane is super powerful. But just anecdotally, when I watch it play out, it never actually does much most of the time. I'll see some games where the Varus Tahm Kench looks really great, and then some games where I just don't see it playing out. So the reason why you draft Varus Tahm Kench is Tahm Kench enables Varus to play aggressive in the laning phase. So Varus is one of the best laners in the game in terms of bot laners. Allows him to play aggressively without being punished by enemy CC or enemy like that. And then in the mid game Varus is great for getting mid prio. He's an AD carry that can get mid prio pretty easily, and increases your siege potential. And then the Tom Kinch can get Varus around the map to get into fights. If you can have a 1-3-1 setup, like they have a Silas and a Jace, you can set up a 1-3-1 and have the Tom Kinch to teleport to the Varus in. Makes so much sense. Just every time I see it locked in, it never actually happens like that. At least anecdotally, the games that I watch, I just don't ever see it happen how people will imagine it happening. But sometimes you do. But I completely understand. But every time I see a Varus Tom Kinch locked in first rotation or first phase, I'm just like, I just don't like it. But anyways, makes complete sense. They have a 1-3-1 setup with a Varus and Tom Kinch with mid prio in the mid game. Clutch. This is the most clutch draft I've ever seen in my entire life. I remember watching this live and I was like, oh, Clutch wins this game for sure. Whenever I watched this live, when I saw this draft, I was like, oh, Clutch wins. This is the most clutch draft. The most scaling bottom lane ever. You have a Sivir. Caitlyn scales super well as well, but you have a Sivir and Braum, one of the safest bottom lanes. And this is just all about scaling. You have the Huni on his signature champion. Lyra on a scaling level 6 jungler. And Demonte on a melee assassin. This is exactly what you want. This is exactly what you want from Clutch. And if you watch that TSM series, and even Kobe talked about it on the cast, they're so good at layering the Braum and Rumble CC and pushing you into terrain and stuff like that, and making the fights like controlling space in fights is one of Clutch's best strong suits. And then Huni is probably the best Rumble player of all time. So, and I have no problem saying that. So this was the most clutch draft I've ever seen. And when I saw that draft locked in, I was like, oh, they're winning. Okay, let's talk about this Game 5. Okay, both of these drafts are a total Game 5 draft. Let's look at these. Most scaling bottom lane that exists. Outside of maybe... honestly, this is the most scaling bottom lane. I know I just said that about Sivir, but Sivir's the most scaling marksman. But the most scaling bottom lane, Sona and Taric. And Team Liquid is actually the best Sona Taric team. You've heard, if you watched the broadcast, you would have heard it on the broadcast. The best Sona Taric team. They really fall down by the minimum in lane, which is like pretty insane. I remember watching the game live, and there was a point where Taric had more CS. It was when he had like 65 CS. He had more CS than the Sivir with an even lane with the waves, back in the center. So there wasn't extra minions for the Sivir to pick up, and was out CSing in the early game, which was pretty insane. Normally you expect the Taric to be like 20 CS behind by the time you get to about 60 CS or so, but he was actually up in CS. That's pretty insane. It's because I thought it was a great draft against Clutch as well, because they don't play any lane aggressors ever. Cool. Scaling top laner, scaling jungler, has a good matchup in the Sejuani, obviously, Sejuani counter, and then scaling mid laner. This is what you draft in Game 5s, honestly, is everybody always drafts scaling. And then scaling bottom lane, scaling top laner, but can play aggressive in the early game, scaling jungler, scaling mid laner. Scaling. Gonna come down to a team fight. I thought this draft was, whenever I was watching this live, it made me a little nervous for Team Liquid initially, but then when I actually saw it complete, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Taking the Sona Taric in the, I think they took it at 2-3 on blue side, I believe. But taking this super early in the draft and not showing your solo laners and actually getting counterpick while you're on blue side, was so good, because they're not going to draft Sona Taric. They're going to draft a scaling bottom laner. It's a Game 5. This is like, in Game 5 they're going to draft scaling. That's what almost everybody does. They're going to draft scaling, so you can just draft the best scaling bottom lane on first rotation. This is such a Game 5 draft. And they're not going to draft an aggressive bottom lane to punish you. So the ways you punish a Sona Taric comp is you can destroy them in lane, and then accelerate the game to where the game ends quickly. And the Sona Taric never comes online. The other way that you can match it is if you have ways to disrupt the team fights really well, then you can nullify the effectiveness of the Sona Taric. Clutch doesn't have any of those things. After I saw this draft complete, I was like, man, this is going to be such a hard game for Clutch to win. So they've drafted both scaling team fighting comps, but they have no way of dealing with the Sona Taric. And that's why Sona Taric's powerful. You just yoke up your entire team, Aatrox and Corki will just run all over you. So whenever I saw this draft, I was like, initially when I saw the draft panning out at the beginning, I was like, okay. And I felt a little nervous for Team Liquid. Once I saw the draft completed, I was like, oh, this is a GG. This is a GG. GG easy. Or it's going to be very hard for Clutch to execute on this. I mean, this isn't a hard draft to execute, but it's going to be so hard to execute this against the Sonateric. And Team Liquid is the best Sonateric team, like you would have heard them on the broadcast. So overall, this series, it was exciting because it went 5 games. I personally thought this series could go 5 games. It's easy to say that when the series is over. I figured Clutch was going to take a game off because they have these exciting picks like the Kiana and stuff like that. And I thought they could get some interesting things happening if they can get their solo laners ahead and then get to the late game. Clutch is actually a good late game team fighting team. So I thought they could actually match execution in team fights with Team Liquid if they are at a positive lane state. If they're at a positive map state once they get to those fights. So I actually thought Clutch could take some games. I didn't think they were going to win the series. I think that's super crazy to say. I didn't think they were going to win the series, but I did think they had a good chance. I did think they had a shot at winning the series, and I thought they had a good chance of taking some games. So what I'm most excited for is how I don't care that much about the third place match, other than that it'll show predictively how they'll do in the gauntlet. So I think all that'll do is just help a little preview for Gauntlet and make Gauntlet a little bit more interesting. Is that third place match? That's what that'll do. But I don't know if the outcome of that series is super important. I think stylistically, Clutch has a pretty good matchup into CLG. I think their solo laners are much better than the enemy solo laners. I think Wiggly really choked against C9. I did a VOD review on some of that series. I think stylistically is an interesting matchup versus CLG. Clutch has those powerful solo laners and the scaling bottom laner. I think actually Clutch has a pretty interesting matchup against Cloud9 as well. Both of their bottom lanes kind of want to do the same thing. They're both team fighting 80 carries. They kind of want to both get to the same thing, and then they both want to play around their solo laners. I think that's a hard win for C9 though. I think they play so much better around their solo laners in the early game, and I think Clutch loses if they end up having to play them in the gauntlet. But I'm pretty sure Cloud9 is going to auto-qualify. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe Cloud9 and Team Liquid are both going to qualify, regardless on result of finals. I could be wrong about that, but no, they both qualify. No way TSM auto-qualifies. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they both auto-qualify now. So anyways, so I believe they both auto-qualify, so I don't think Cloud9 will have to play against them. I know Team Liquid auto-qualifies now. The only way they didn't qualify was if they lost this series and Cloud9 lost in finals. So yeah, they both qualify then. So I think Clutch has a positive matchup into CLG. So I think CLG might be our third team going to Worlds. The only wild card that's going to be interesting, I'll talk more about Gauntlet in a bit, but the only wild card that's going to be interesting is how TSM looks after their time off. It's going to be interesting. I am very neutral on that. I'm normally optimistic about TSM, but I'm I'll have to see it when it comes. So anyways, cool deal. All right, that's it with that series. So let's talk about our C9 versus CLG. So I did a VOD review on Game 3, which is the game that CLG came back. So if you're interested in watching that, make sure you watch that. The quality of the video is not so great. The quality of the content is great, but the actual video quality is not. So I apologize for that. I'm really sad about that. Won't happen in the future though. I fixed the encoder settings. But let's talk about this Cloud9 CLG series. So the tail of the tape, what's really funny is C9. Let's turn this off so we can see it. C9 actually has a negative goal differential and negative first tower percentage, which is interesting for a team that got a playoff bye. So that's interesting for a team like that. And the reason why that happens, honestly, is I feel like this isn't a shock to say, their bottom lane usually loses lane. And I believe they usually have negative gold differential. I don't know that for sure, but that's really easy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a negative gold differential in lane. I know it's a big deal about sneaking lane right now. I mean, it's always been a meme, sneaking lane, but it's like a controversial topic to talk about now. But whatever. I mean, Sneaky is a team fight AD carry, and that's fine. And they play weak side bottom lane a lot of the time. They play weak side bottom lane, and they play AD carries that get priority in the mid lane in the mid game, like Ezreal and Sivir. Very good champions are getting prio in the mid lane. They play supports like Braum. Braum 7 games played right there. There's a champion that makes sure that you don't lose the laning phase. Make sure that you don't die. It's a defensive AD or defensive support champion. So they're definitely a solo lane centric team, and they're the best. They have the best mid jungle synergy of any team that you'll see. They just get so many kills around mid and jungle. So that's why they have a negative gold differential. Is their weak side is really good at not dying, but they definitely don't lose the minimum. They don't lose the maximum either, but their bottom lane loses kind of hard on weak side. Sneaky's just a weak side AD carry. That's fine. Cool. So definitely not. I would say they get a lot of advantages in the early game in their solo lanes. So this gold differential isn't very representative of how the games actually play out. Cloud9 is the best objective, best at setting up team fights around objectives. They're really good at it. You'll see like crazy Aatrox flanks, positioning. In the game that I've VOD reviewed, I'll keep plugging that forever. The game that I've VOD reviewed, their setup around the objective was not. You could see what they were trying to do, but they didn't actually execute their flank wards correctly. And so it was a detriment in that game that they know how to set up objectives, because they were trying to set it up. They were trying to set up their objective fight, but they didn't actually do it in time. And they died because they were trying to set up the perfect team fight, but they didn't do the homework first to set it up correctly. But just lack of flank wards. They had plenty of time to set it up, but watch that later. Cool. We'll look at COG's stats. So positive gold differential. Usually you should have a positive gold differential. Usually you should have a positive gold differential on your if you're a winning team. So they have a winning record, so you should have a positive goal differential. Does this include the playoffs? Yes, it does include the playoffs. Cool. Let's see. So if you look at their team is interesting because their mid laner almost only plays scaling mid laners. You can see right here. Boom. Almost only plays scaling mid laners, and then Ruin plays a crazy amount of champions. They have a couple different styles they play around. They're definitely a bot-centric team. They like to play scaling marksman and team fight you. So they're a very interesting team. Let me look at a stat that I wanted to see on Clutch. Yeah, high priority on Herald. Get Herald in 70% of their games. That's pretty crazy. So they have a negative Rift Herald percentage. Less than one dragon. I'm just going to compare this to Clutch, because Clutch prioritizes those objectives. They usually just take scaling matchups and out team fight you, is what it looks like that they do. They have mid-prio champions, scaling marksmen, and beat you in team fights in the later game. They're a pretty interesting team. They rely a lot on Biofrost engages and Biofrost playmaking. When they actually get their wins. If you watch the series, especially that game 3, they're won based off of a play around their bottom lane. Very bot-centric team. A really interesting team to me. They just work really well together, but don't have any real superstars. I think Biofrost is the best player on the team, and I think that's what most people think. They're a pretty interesting team. Cool. So Cloud9 solo lane focused team, COG more of a bot lane focused team. They're not a huge like punish you in lane type of bottom lane, but they definitely play around their bottom lane in terms of how they get their victories. Cool. Alrighty, let's look at the actual games, how they played out. So game one, looks kind of like a stomp. The goal differential wasn't crazy. This game was 2 days ago. Let's see what their drafts want to do. Oh yeah, this is a Niski Kiana game. So yeah, I remember watching this game now. Cool. So mid jungle synergy, scaling bottom lane that doesn't lose lane, and a team fighting top laner. They utilize Aatrox really well in terms of their objective setup as well. I do remember watching this game. Really, game one? Okay. Power of Evil. So scaling. Full on scaling. Got punished by the mid jungle synergy. Can't match in the side lane. So pretty easy right there. This was a stomp again. I do remember this game as well. They play for scaling side laner. Actually at punishing bottom lane. And then Svenskeren on the Gragas again. And Niski kind of popping off and can play for side lane control. So they have 1-3-1 options in this comp, as well as a really great team fight, and can collapse on bottom. So when you draft a Gangplank and you draft, and then they have a punishing bottom lane, you can actually play more aggressive with that comp. Cool, COG. They drafted. Oh, I remember this was a Ruin Akali game, and he got solo cut in lane, I believe. So this is a team fighting comp. You do have someone who can answer side lane, but seems like got super far behind in this game. So this is a team fighting comp with someone who can answer in the side lane. I don't hate the draft. Here comes a team fight execution and kind of minimizing what you lose in the early game, because none of these are early game champions. Except for obviously the Varus, but Caitlyn and Thresh has a lot of kill threat on that lane, especially onto the Tahm Kench. Cool. Alrighty. This was the game that COG won. So I did a VOD review analysis on this. I thought the Draven and Morgana was such a good pick because they gave the Xayah Rakan to them and then immediately took the lane matchup that destroys Xayah Rakan. If you don't know why they destroy Xayah Rakan, you should watch my VOD review and I'll explain more. But so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Anyways, do a bunch of shameless plugs. But I'm just not going to talk about it because it takes forever to talk about. But anyways, and this is the game where Niski got super far behind. I go into the depth on why that happened. He lost a lot of side lanes because they were playing like this was a closeout game. Svenskeren got super far ahead in this game. I believe Licorice solo killed in this game as well. Ruin gets solo killed a lot. No, Svenskeren came in and killed him. I remember. Just watch a VOD review on this game. I explain a lot more about how this game actually broke down. It was really good play by Power of Evil in the late game, but it really was just C9 not setting up their objectives correctly. And I just talked about how good they are at setting up their objectives, and they just didn't do it at all. They were playing very nervous. It felt like, or very not nervous, but playing very like anxious. They're playing very anxious. They're like, let's just please close out this game. They made a couple pivotal mistakes in the game that allowed COG to win the game. Wow. This was a crazy amount of gold. Another closeout game. Wow, Niski. So C9 drafted again. Safe bottom lane. You can run 1-3-1 composition with this and a team fighting comp. Oh yeah, I do remember watching this game now. COG drafts exactly what you'd think. Scaling mid laner. Scaling bottom lane that can actually play aggressive. I did like when they picked this because they picked a bottom lane that could play really aggressive. They picked a bottom lane that could play really aggressive, but Sivir has a really positive matchup into the Caitlyn because you can just get free mana in lane. And then they essentially have a team fight composition that doesn't have a whole lot of ways to answer a 1-3-1 composition other than the Akali. So it's a positive draft for C9, especially just based off of what they want to do. So this series played out kind of exactly I thought it would. I thought this series would kind of be a stomp. Easy to say when you see afterwards. I think most people thought Cloud9 versus COG was going to be a stomp. Just stylistically, it is a tough matchup for COG. Their solo laners just aren't going to be able to handle what the solo laners and the jungle are going to pump out from C9. So I thought this was just a really hard matchup. The one game that they won was C9 just threw super hard, and they made a couple of mistakes in the game that I break down a lot in my VOD review. I'm not going to break it down too much right now, or I'll talk for the next hour about each individual mistake that they made that caused COG. They did a little bit of a gamble and then didn't set up their objectives correctly, and so the gamble just got crushed. That's why Niski got so far behind. Is they're playing a little anxious and set up a gamble, but the gamble was like a 90% play, but they just didn't do the legwork to make it that 90% play, so it turned into a 50% play, and then got a little too anxious to try to close out the game. And that's how they lost the game. The series should have been a 3-0, but C9 played incorrectly. All right, so that's that series. That is that series. And we've already talked a little bit about Gauntlet play, but we'll talk more about it now. I think the big deal with Gauntlet is the thing that's really interesting. I don't know all the teams. I know FlyQuest, TSM. This might be all the teams. FlyQuest, TSM, COG, and Clutch. That might be all the teams that are going to be in Gauntlet. I think TSM will be the highest seeded team. I think they get the buys. I believe they get the buys in the Gauntlet. So that makes it a little bit more interesting. I think just based off of performance and just based off the stylistically of the teams, I think Clutch is looking like the best team going in the Gauntlet right now. We'll have to see Clutch face against COG, but I think it's a good matchup for Clutch. I think COG has a really hard time dealing against teams that can play really well around the solo lanes and can match you in team fights. I think they're going to have a really hard time against Clutch. I think Clutch is going to hard stomp COG. I don't know what Amazing said on the desk. He said one of the teams are going to hard stomp, but I think Clutch is going to hard stomp COG. Stylistically, I think TSM can match Clutch, even though they just lost to them. They're going to have some time to recuperate and figure out what they want to do, but I think stylistically they can match Clutch in all facets of the game. But I'm really just going to leave TSM to what they're going to show us. So I really don't know what to think about TSM. My hopes are very neutral. I'm not like super hot on them. I'm not super cold on them. Very neutral. I'm very just, let's see what happens when they play. Given the time that they have, maybe they'll be a different team than they showed in the first round of playoffs. Maybe they're going to be spring TSM. Who knows? So I'm really looking forward to that, but not super hopeful, not super doubtful. Really just waiting to see. I think Clutch looks like the strongest team, but TSM could definitely be good. I don't think COG has a very good chance, unless they prove me wrong in the third place match. I don't think they have a very good chance. Clutch. I think stylistically, Clutch just matches up really well. And that's not just because they did well against Team Liquid. I think they have a really good matchup against COG. But anyways, all right, that is the end of the second episode of BTJ. Blame the Jungler. Hopefully the video quality was great for this video. I've been messing with my encoder so much. Try to figure it out. Hopefully it is. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you on the next video. Okay. Bye-bye.